Hey, if you are new or newer around here, you might not know that my lovely wife, Linda, is our pastor of Worhsip Arts and has been for a long time and grew into that role all the way from the earliest days of beginning this church community, which is at Easter was like 33 years. And so recently, we're doing these summer conversations, and recently Linda and I had set aside part of a day to just talk through some worship questions and things that we were wrestling with. And I found the conversation so engaging and the questions seemed so important that, I guess it was actually you that said it to me. Linda said we should have this conversation in front of the congregation. And I said, I'm thinking about doing these summer conversations, so that would fit in perfect. So we decided that this morning we would have a conversation about worshiping together, which I know at first might strike you like, I don't know, we show up at church, we worship together, what is there to talk about? But there's more to talk about and think about when it comes to these things than you might think, and that's really the part you never see. You come in and you see the band playing songs, and we do what we do, we have communion, and we hear the word. The part you don't see is all the things Linda thinks through and works through, and then all the people she works with, to try to have our worship come together with a lot of intentional thought and care. So we thought we would have this conversation. We all have had different ideas and experiences about worship and about church. And a lot of our ideas about worship, right? Like we talk about worship. We say, we're going to worship, or our church worships at 9 o'clock, or you might be talking about your own experience and saying, I was worshiping and I felt this or this happened. But we don't talk about worship a lot, but most of us have had our ideas about worship shaped by traditions that we grew up in or churches that we have gone to. And some of that shaping might be that we came away from experiences we've had in churches. We came away with maybe some positive things, like we would say, this is what was good about the church I grew up in, about the worship. Or you might have things that you would say, like, this is what was not so positive about the worship experience. So I thought it'd be an interesting way to start this morning to help you guys kind of let us set the stage by asking 2 or 3 of you to share, like, whatever the worship tradition was you grew up in, like what was positive about it, and, without being too critical, maybe what was not as positive about it or not so positive about it. Again, not the doctrine and not everything about the church, but the worship itself, because that's what we're talking about this morning. So I'm curious, would any of you venture and there's no right or wrong answers, it's just your experience. Like you grew up in church and this is the part of, what kind of church was it, and, because some of you grew up like we did in high church, liturgical, right? What they call smells and bells, right? You got candles and incense and crosses, and some of you grew up in stripped down Bible preaching churches, and some of you grew up somewhere in between. So positive, not so positive of your early worship experience. Any thoughts? Kat?
I grew up in the Catholic Church, so we didn't have so much incense and bell. Because we were doing like St. Louis Jesuits.
Okay.
And the guitar mass.
Oh, yeah. Linda and I actually did music for guitar mass when we were young. Yeah. 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 So what was the positive, and was there any not so positive?
The positive was that it was a little more accessible.
Okay.
The negative was while it was familiar, the Bible liturgy was the same all the time. It was the same all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, liturgy is wonderful, and it can become like highway hypnosis also. And yeah, the whole guitar mass thing, the 60s and 70s, and probably some of it did last into the 80s, was interesting because that was America's period of folk music, right? That was the Peter, Paul, and Mary era. And it found its way into liturgical churches, which was fascinating. Then, for the most part, it found its way back out of liturgical churches. So that was sort of their move toward a little more accessibility, contemporizing of the worship. And I remember the one we used to, which was in the basement of the Catholic school, was packed. So, yeah, interesting. Anybody else like...
Hey, Fran, online they can't hear without the mic.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Lisbeth's got a mic now. Sorry, yeah. Who raised their hand back here? Oh, yes. Trish.
I've only been here for about a year and a half. Thank you. I got a good voice.
No,
They need it for the live stream.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
No pressure for that.
Anyhow, and I used to live here in Plainfield. So I had just gotten back in town and back into Plainfield, but on the other side of town. And I was going to church at St. Mary's, 3 Sundays in a row, and no one spoke to me. No one. And so I decided I might try something else. I'll just call them and ask if I can be brought back into the whatever. And I asked the lady why I was calling, and I told her about my background and everything. I raised my kids here, and I got baptized and everything, and I said, so I want to join back into the, and she says, well, you can do that online.
you could do it online.
I never said anything. I just slammed down on it, and then I said to my sister-in-law, which was his mother, and I said, because she was she liked phones where you can find everything. So I said, well, I got to find a new church. And she says, where do you want it? And I said, Plainfield. She says, there's one right here. I said, then that's mine. And this is mine.
And you walked in here. Yeah, sometimes, thanks, Trish. Yeah, sometimes, and it's a sad thing, that sometimes we have not the best community experiences in a church. And that can happen in all kinds of churches, to be honest, where people come in and they're looking for connection and to be welcomed in, and then it doesn't happen, and that can be a hard thing. Anybody else, I'm curious, like the tradition you grew up in, positive, what was good about it? Heather. Oh. Awesome.
So, yeah, I grew up in the Church of Christ, which is like old school, fundamental, stripped down. So a cappella is what I was raised on.
Yep, no instruments.
Yeah, it's a big point of contention there. So a cappella, 4-part harmonies, that kind of thing. I think the good in that, there's a lot of reverence. Maybe sometimes that could be a disadvantage, like it's a little too reverent. And the songs are like 1500, 1600, 1700. So some of the words are not applicable. If you're growing up in that, you learn to sing it, but you don't know what you're singing about. So give it or take. I think generally I really appreciate it because it sounds really good.
Oh, yeah.
But it's hard to really understand, I think, what you're singing.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was positive, and there was maybe not so positive. Let's do Heather, and then that'll be the last one. So just to comment on that, somebody else, Austin, in the first service, grew up in an apostolic Christian church where they didn't use instruments, and that might sound really strange to all of you, but there is a certain part of Protestant Christianity that won't use musical instruments in church because they aren't mentioned in the New Testament. And so that's kind of the rationale. It's sort of interesting to me because the last psalm in the book of Psalms is all instruments. It's like praise him with the tambourine and the cymbal and the lyre and the drums, right? It's all this. And so I used to have a pastor friend who was Church of Christ pastor, and I would say to him, like, explain this to me, and he would explain it, and I would say, so why did God change his mind between Psalm 150 and the birth of Jesus? And now we can't have instruments. And he'd say, I don't know, and I don't need to know. I just know that this is the right, whatever. So anyway, okay, Heather.
I grew up Southern Baptist, and we had our hymnals, for all of our services, and so every service you would sing from the hymnal, all 4 verses of every hymnal, which in high school, is when I was doing this, was a little boring, but I was part of a big youth group, so we'd challenge each other with our 4-part harmonies to get through the service. The one good thing was every Christmas we got to play handbells, and I thought that was pretty cool at the time.
There you go. See, so we shouldn't say only the Catholics had the bells, because you had bells, right? Um, so, one of the things that we wanted to talk about a little bit, and that's kind of why I wanted to have you guys kind of prime our pump, is sort of this question of, well, what is worship? Because we use that word, but we don't ever really back up and kind of define it. So in the New Testament, there are actually two words for worship. One is kind of the word you would expect. It means to bow down, right? Like to fall down before your God and show reverence. The other word is really interesting. I think it's the Greek word, I haven't looked at it for long, proskuneo, which means to kiss toward. So it's this word of affection, like that to worship is to kiss toward the object of your worship, which sounds much more sort of heart-oriented. It's interesting that the early Christians, kind of glommed onto that word as a way for talking about worship. So Linda and I, we talk about these things a lot, right? About all of church, but worship. And occasionally we go through a period where we have intense talks about worship. So we've been doing that lately. And I've been thinking a lot about some of these things, and she's been thinking a lot about. So when we were on our way back from New York this past Monday, from seeing our daughter and her family, we were listening to a podcast interview with a Christian musician named John Guerra. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him. Phenomenal, really an amazing writer and musician, but also an amazing thinker. If you want to really have yourself challenged, go home today and on YouTube, pull up John Guerra's song, American Gospel, which is a contrast between the Beatitudes and how we've come to think about Jesus in the modern church. And it's striking. It's convicting. He actually takes the Beatitudes and he flips them around. Blessed are the powerful, blessed are the rich. And all the things that we glorify in the modern church. So anyway, but we were listening to this interview with John Guerra, and he said some really interesting things about worship that I wanted to kind of spit out this morning. One was, he said that he defined worship like when we're in the act of worship, like when we gather here and we're singing, we're praying together. He defined worship as trying to come into contact with the invisible, with the goodness, the beauty, the truth, and the presence that are God. And that's what we do, right? When we're singing, when we're praying, when we're gathered together, it's like we're reaching into this space. These eyes can't see it. But with our hearts, maybe with our hands, we're reaching into this space and saying, I want to have communion with you, God. I want to make contact with you. The other thing he said that was really interesting and I think corrective for the modern church is he said that too often in the modern church, with all of its hype, I don't know if you've any of you have ever attended church where, it's a full-blown light show and a smoke machine and the band is rocking out. He said too often the hype in the modern church is extractional. And what he meant is it's trying emotionally to sort of elicit a certain response and pull something out of you. It's as if when the band fires up in some churches, it's like they're saying, we're going to tell you what to feel, and we're going to make you feel that by how loud the drums are, or how the lights are flashing. We're going to elicit this emotional response. And John Guerra said worship needs to be invitational, in that we, like Linda and I always say, we want it to be engaging, right? I mean, we do good music here. We want the music to be engaging. I want my words to be engaging. We want our liturgy to be engaging. But we also want to leave that space so that when you come in here or new people come in here, there's this sense of God is here, but you got to cross a space in here to find that communion with God. You gotta make that contact, right? I'm not going to coerce you into it. I'm not going to manipulate you into it. I'm not going to push you into it. I'm going to say that goodness and beauty and truth and presence is here. If you want to try to figure out how to reach across into that with your own spirit, with your own heart. So I guess I kind of wanted to ask you, like, you're our pastor of Worship Arts. So what is I know the answer is multifaceted,
Yeah.
but what is worship when you think about worship?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think in church, worship is many things. You know, it's prayers, it's singing, it's bringing the word, it's communion. It can be giving, you know, our gifts can be worship. In life, I think worship is incarnational. Worship is everything, you know, it's a part of our life, who we are. And I think, in my mind, you know, as we come to church and we kind of soak in, I think that should fill us and pour out of us into other aspects of our life, so that worship becomes more just a part of who we are.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have church backgrounds where worship wasn't a thing you did.
Yes.
Like, you know, I joked in the first service that, you know, in the little town I grew up in Iowa, this was not true of my parents, I should throw out that caveat, but there was sort of a joke in town that when Saturday night Mass ended at St. Mary's Catholic Church, our beautiful little Catholic church, at the opposite end of Main Street was the bar. And the cars went from the, you're nodding your head. So the cars went out of the church parking lot and down the street to the bar parking lot, because you'd done church. You'd worship. That was it. It was in a package, right? And what you're saying, which we've come to know over many decades of our own journey, is that what we do here as an act of worship reminds us and calls us to be shaped and formed in a way that when we go out of here with our hearts, our life becomes a worship in terms of how we have communion with God on a Tuesday morning, with how we talk to our neighbor.
Yeah, how we love each other.
Yeah, how we love each other. And yeah, you know, it's funny, people often want to give like one definition to things. I feel like worship is one of those things where it's multiple things. You know, I remember the church Linda and I went to, 35 years ago, before we began this church community. There was an elder in that church who always used to say, worship isn't for people, worship is for God, because he was looking at it through that lens of, this is about coming in and glorifying God and telling God how, Lord, you're great, you're whatever, And there was, for a while, I was like, maybe he's right about that, But then the more I read the Gospels, I saw that Jesus, who I think we could say was sort of the ultimate human being in communion with God, the ultimate worshiper, right? Jesus comes down and walks among us and he makes it all about people. So you can't really say like, worship is just about like everybody come in here and tell God how great. No, there is something in the gathering that's supposed to happen to us. And we even see that in like 1 Corinthians when Paul talks about worship. One of you has a psalm, a hymn, a revelation, and he says, let all these things be done for edification. In other words, to build one another up. There is a part of it that is what is happening to us in here. So one of the things questions I think about a lot, and we talk about, we're living in this time where a lot of people are giving up on church. I think that's part of why I wanted to have a conversation about worship too. Why we wanted to have a conversation about worship. A lot of people are giving up on church because they're frustrated with American Christianity. And if that doesn't make sense to you, just go listen to John Guerra's American Gospel and you'll go, oh, that's what Fran's talking about. Yeah. Every time I listen to that song, I'm just like, yeah, we need to hear it. But people are frustrated with American Christianity. There's a lot of talk these days about the ways churches have hurt people. I mean, as if to add insult to injury, last week or 2 weeks ago, the Southern Baptist Convention, who promised us that after covering up the abuse of women and children by their pastors for decades, promised us they were going to do better. They not only have scrapped all those plans to do better, they didn't do anything to change it. They didn't put anything in place that would change it. And then on top of it, they actually codified into their constitution 2 weeks ago that women absolutely can't be pastors, elders, etc. So they basically said, we're not going to protect you and we're going to keep you in the place we've had you forever. And so my point is there's a lot of church hurt out there and people are rethinking a lot of things. We talk about deconstruction, reconstruction, by the way. We're going to have a great conversation about that on a Sunday morning. And so I think a lot about, like, I want people to stay connected to the church, and it's not because I'm a pastor, it's because I think it matters. But that question rolls around a lot more these days. Like, does it matter? A lot of people are saying like, hey, I love Jesus, I'm done with church. So if I asked you, like, why does the gathering matter?
Yeah.
What would you say?
Well, I think the gathering matters for a lot of reasons, but, if I look at it personally, if you guys think back to the pandemic, being stuck at home, not being able to come to church for a long period of time, to me, I'm an introvert, and that was too much for me. I missed, seeing people's faces and, having conversations.
Although there
and-
certainly were some introverts out there who probably thought, this is great.
This is awesome.
I don't ever have to see anybody with this pandemic,
And I can worship in my pajamas
Yeah,
every week.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can worship in my pajamas every week, right?
Yeah. But we need each
There's
other.
somebody worshiping in their pajamas
I'm
who's online
sorry,
with us.
person in your
Yeah,
pajamas.
right.
Have a great day. Anyway, yeah, I feel like there are a lot of reasons, but we can be Jesus with skin on to each other. We need hugs and love and listening ears and advice and someone smiling at us or hugging us when we cry. We need all those things. And, we can develop those relationships in church where, over a period of time, we can have those kind of people in our lives,
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
it is.
part of what
It is a
to
community.
me.
That's one of the things I love about LifeSpring. Like, we've grown a bunch in the last year or two. There's some of you here this morning, you're brand new. But I do love the fact that, in fact, we went to 2 services because the room was getting too full with one service. But I love the fact that we're a community where people can know other people, like size-wise. Like, you're not a face in a crowd of 5,000 at LifeSpring. And I have to say, I love that. I love the fact that I can know and try to know, so many people. Yeah, for me, it's all those things you said. Like, I just can't imagine trying to do my life journey or my faith journey apart from a community. I need that community to do this. I don't know how else to put it, but I think of this. There's a verse in Hebrews 10 in the New Testament where the writer says, "Do not forsake the assembling together, as some are in the habit of doing, but continue and so that you can encourage one another and spur one another on toward love and good deeds." So there's something that happens, right? It's like that verse that says, iron sharpens iron, right? Like we help each other take the journey. And so the writer basically says, like, it might be tempting, but don't do that, Instead, continue to be a part of the community. So with this conversation about being a part of the community, one of the things we talk about, and I'm going to bring it up this morning, is church is different than it used to be. So, I don't know if you know this, but on a given Sunday morning, I would say, attendance lightens up a little in the summer, but even during the school year, on a given Sunday morning, maybe if you add up how many people are in the LifeSpring community and then how many were present on a Sunday morning, it's probably about 60%. So your church is actually bigger than you think, because when you come to church, you're with about 60% of the group, of the congregation. But church is also different because people are leaving church. They're frustrated with churches. A lot of you have found your way in here because you have realized LifeSpring is a church that's centered in the Jesus of the gospel, centered in love, resisting being politically co-opted. And so you've said, hey, this is a different kind of church. And that's why a lot of people have landed here in the last year or two. But because we're in this weird time, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the church has shrunk by tens of millions of people in the last 20 years in America. People who just have said, I'm done, right? So with that, anytime things get messy like that, you also have people just kind of moving in and out. So we have people who come and they're like, I don't know if I trust church, right? And then they trust it a little and they come for a while, and maybe they come all the time. Then you have other people who have been Christians for a long time. They're kind of working through some questions and they kind of drop off and stop coming. So we see a lot of from where we sit, we kind of watch this in and out flow that goes on. And it's almost like normal now. But one of the things that we've noticed is that sometimes when people say, I'm done with church, or I got to take a break from church because I have things I'm not sure about with church or whatever. It's very easy, and I'm going to say us, because if I wasn't a pastor, I mean, I have to be here, right? So, but if I wasn't a pastor, maybe it would happen to me. So I'm going to say us. It's easy for us, we have noticed that it's easy for us as human beings to forget that you don't just come to church for what you get out of it, that you also come to church to give to other people, to be there for other people. You want to talk about that for a second?
Well, I think we talked about some of this before, but you know, you might be someone's rescue rope, you know,
Yeah.
someday without even realizing it,
Yeah.
you know, and your absence is maybe more important than you thought it was, you know?
Yeah. You may be the smile that person needs on a Sunday morning. You may be the handshake, or you might have a relationship with someone in this community, and they show up on a Sunday morning thinking, you know, I'm hoping to see that person. I need a conversation with that person. That'll help me in whatever way it is, right? And then that person comes and you're not there that Sunday morning. And that's not a guilt thing. It's just that we are part of a community. It's just like a family, right? Isn't this what you teach your kids growing up? It's not all about you, right? Right? When you're part of a family, in that family, you learn that part of what you are in that family for is to give to other people and to help other people.
And I think if you're a well-rounded church, hopefully, you know, we see this,
Yeah.
right? That it's, you know, when you look around church culture, so much of it is very consumer-oriented.
Yeah.
You know, if you guys, before you came here, you probably looked at websites and everybody sang the praises of everything they had to offer you, you know? And those things are all great. Many of them are
Yeah.
needed. But it's not just about what we can receive. It's about what we can give.
Yeah. So I think that's a good reminder for all of us. You know, even I need to be reminded, I get in my own little pastor world. And there are some times where I'm working on my pastor stuff and it's 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning and I can just feel the Holy Spirit just stopping me and saying, hey, there's like 10 people you need to reach out to. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Put the laptop down, send some texts, make some phone calls, remember that people matter. In fact, I had a funny, I wasn't going to tell this, but it's a good moment to tell this story. So I went for a walk last night. Linda and I, we live just on the other side of downtown, and we go for these walks in the evening, oftentimes, where we walk through downtown Plainfield and through the old neighborhood and to the park. We walk around the park by the river. There's a loop there, and then we come back through downtown. About 1 out of every 10 times I stop for ice cream on the way back. Kind of defeats some of the purpose of the walk. But we take these walks, and normally she's the one saying to me, like, hey, come on, get up, get off your butt, let's go for a walk. And she was over here working all day physically yesterday, and she was whooped. And so last night I was like, I kind of feel like I need to go for a walk. And I think it's the first time I can ever remember she was like, see ya. So I went for a walk, but that was good because there was something I had been wanting to just kind of find some time to kind of talk with the Lord about. So my prayer on my 30, 40-minute walk was, because this, you know, church is always, it's a living thing. It's always changing. And I'm always wondering as a pastor, like, what is it that matters most right now? Where do we need to go next? Those kind of questions, right? So I was saying to the Lord on this walk over and over, what do you want to say to me? Like, what do I need to hear from you right now, where I am and where our church is? Like, what do I need to hear from you? And every time I prayed that prayer on this walk, which was just last night, I didn't get any answer except that, I don't know how I can describe it, except that in my mind, I just kept seeing all the faces of you guys, of this church community, as if the Lord was saying to me, like, this is what you finally become and how we see people at LifeSpring. Like, that's it, Fran. That's what matters right now, is people. But so one of the things that I know you wanted to talk about is you wanted to talk a little bit about how everybody doesn't experience the same thing in worship. And why it's important for all of us to sort of realize that.
I think when we were talking about this, it made me go back in my memory to a book I read many years ago by Richard Foster, and I think it was called like Living Streams, or
Yeah.
Streams of
Stream,
Living Water or
yeah.
something. I don't know. Anyway, it was about how everyone is wired differently. And some of the examples they gave, and I can't even remember all the names of them, but like one of them was an enthusiast. That's a person who, you know, they're your extrovert. They come into church, they're smiling, they're happy, they resonate with all the cheerful songs, you know, the upbeat. And then there's people who find God in nature, or they want to come in a cathedral and, you know, soak in the
Maybe more contemplative.
the sacredness, the reverence, you know. So anyway, everybody's wired differently, and you know, the activist, that's
Yeah,
another one.
yeah.
You know, the person who you love to hate sometimes, you know, the person who, go, 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 we have to do this, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, so anyway, that just made me think of that in relationship to
Worship.
everyone in
Yeah,
church,
yeah.
and how we don't always recognize that we're not all the same.
Yeah.
You know, like the person next to me doesn't need necessarily what I need. And I think it's good for us to open our eyes to that and to think about it. And, you know, that can bleed over into all areas of church, you know, like especially a church service. Like, this is important, you know, we need to do this or we need to say that. But I think about it in relationship to music oftentimes, that, you know, I have had the same song be praised and hated by people in our congregation. You know, there have been even times where, you know, someone in the band was like, oh, I don't really like this song. And I'm like, too bad. Like, the church loves this song, the congregation loves this song, you know, so we're doing it. And I know when you look back in church history, you know, some of us were raised in churches that did a lot of hymns. Some of us love that. Some people don't love that. That could be a blessing to some people, or it could be triggering for some people. And, you know, you touched on a little bit earlier about people who are deconstructing and reconstructing. You know, as our church grows, we have grown with a lot of people who have gone or are going through that process. And we need to look at them and see that some of them have broken places. And those places are there because the church did them wrong.
Yeah.
And so they might be seeming to us overly sensitized to certain things, you
Right.
know? I remember doing a song a couple years ago that I thought was awesome, and somebody told me that a person was very hurt by that song because they had recently lost a loved one, and the song was about, you know, resurrection.
Yeah.
And they like weren't there, they weren't ready for that, you know? But I guess this is just to say that in church and in worship, we need to realize that we're not all the same.
Yeah.
And what you need and what's blessing you might not do anything for me, but I love you, and because I love you,
Right.
I am happy that is something that's soaked into your soul.
One person was hurt by that song, and the person
Other
next to them
person-
may have been finding hope
Correct.
in that same
Correct.
song, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So I
which
just
makes
think
your
that's
job
something
pretty
we
much
need-
impossible, by
we
the way.
need-
So
yeah, it is.
yeah.
But it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
So something I skipped over earlier that I do want to come back and touch on. Yeah. So we need to give each other grace,
Yes.
right? That you know, don't ever go home from church and say, how come that service wasn't just crafted around my personal tastes and needs, you know? Well, it's because you're in a community with hundreds of other people, and worship is being crafted for them. But another thing which I kind of skipped over inadvertently, I want to go back and touch on is, you pay a lot of attention. You have a phrase you use that I love. A number of years ago, I don't know what we were talking about, and you used the phrase, songs teach. In other words, songs aren't just what we feel. The words of songs also communicate theology.
Yes.
And so you've had a journey with like sorting out songs you are and aren't going to use, or
Yeah, it happens on the daily. So normally, you know, I might hear a song and I'll think, oh, I like that song. I like the way it feels. I like the way it sounds. I like the melody line. I like the chorus. I like the instruments, whatever. This happened several years ago with a song that was like, it was so catchy. And I kept hearing it on the radio. And, you know, but basically when it came down to it, like, the gist of the song was kind of like, this isn't our home. It was kind of like a Waiting for Heaven song, you know, like this isn't our home. And I wish I could remember the name of it because I still like the song, but I don't sing it here. And because this is our home, you know, and I looked at that song and I'm like, it's not right. It's not true. Because as long as we're here, this is our home. And we are here to love and to live and to learn. And I'm just not going to sing about escapism all the time.
Right, because we're part of that generation of 1970s, 80s Christian rapture babies, right?
We were always waiting.
Where you fall in love with Jesus, and then we all wait by the departure gate, and the hell with the world. I mean, that was the theology, right?
He's going to get us out of here.
Because what we weren't reading was, thy kingdom come,
right.
thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right? Yep. That in one sense, there's a theological tension there. We are on our way home. The Bible talks about us as pilgrims, as sojourners, but in another sense, God has come to us in our home here so that we can know him and be filled and be changed and then be conduits of that goodness, beauty, and truth into the world and into people.
So then just backtracking a little bit into song theology, like as I do like to call it, you know, there are times where we do a song, it could be a song we've done for a while, and suddenly I'm like, there's something in there I'm not sure I resonate with, or, you know, people don't resonate with anymore. We might change a line. Shh, don't tell.
Don't tell the writers.
But there have been times where we've done that.
You know, that's funny because I think in many, many years ago, there were times I said to you, just change the line of that song. And you were more of a rule follower back then. And it's true. And she would say, you can't do that. And now she's like, I'm changing the line of that line of that song.
With all due respect to the authors.
Right.
Yeah, there are times where we change a line.
And you did that recently.
We did.
You and Stacy.
We did.
It's a new song we do called Graves into Gardens.
Right. And we were reading along, and we loved the song, and we loved everything about the song. And it's very jubilant. And I think we first did it around Easter. But anyway, there was a line in the song. And part of the reason, sometimes when I look at something, it could be something that's maybe pulled out of the Old Testament that people don't know what it means. They'd be like, what the heck does that mean? So the line in the song was, you turn stones into armies, I believe, which is like an Old Testament thing. I don't remember where that even comes from. I didn't look it up. But Stacy and I were both just kind of like, oh, that line's bugging me. And I think part of it was bugging me because we were at war. And I didn't want to sing a jubilant song about and then have war in it.
And and one of the things that bugs me about it, I wasn't in on that conversation, but one of the things that would bug me about that line in that song is that we're also in a period where Christians in America are starting to use a lot of militancy language again, and we've got this hyper-masculinity that gets fostered in a lot of the churches, and we've got Christians in our government talking about how we need the warrior ethos. So there's this melding happening again of Christianity with this hyper-masculine warrior kind of thing, which you're really going to have a hard time finding with Jesus in the Gospels. And so when we start armyizing, militarizing our Christianity, there's some problem with that. Yeah.
So we changed the line, and actually Stacy came up with it, and it had nothing to do with the line that was already there. She changed it to you turn pain into stories.
Yeah.
Which I've had so many people say, oh, that line jumped out at me.
That's so
apparently Stacy was very inspired when she came up with that.
That's so good. Yeah. Yeah. So, thank you, Tim. My wife is something else, I'll tell you what. So, one of the things that I just wanted to touch on, it's kind of a confession and kind of a teaching moment maybe, but so Linda and I grew up in Roman Catholicism. We grew up with the candles and crosses and incense and all those things, right? And And there's a lot of talk when you grow up in a liturgical church about the idea of sacraments, sacramental theology. And so in the Catholic Church, we grew up with these 7 sacraments, right? So it's like baptism and confirmation and marriage and holy orders and communion and last rites. So you have these 7 sacraments. Mostly what you grow up think, and what you're told is that God's grace comes to people through the sacraments, right? So when we kind of moved away from our Catholicism, I was like, I was like, I don't need sacraments. I got the Bible, and my Bible says God just comes to us directly, so I don't need any of this kind of stuff, right? I don't need any of this hocus pocus, right? Interestingly enough, did you know the phrase hocus pocus has its origins in medieval Catholicism or in Reformation Catholicism? Yeah, because the Protestants didn't like the Catholic theology of communion, and in the Latin Mass, this is my body is hoc est corpus. And so the Protestants, deriding the Catholics in the 15 and 1600s, said Catholicism's a bunch of hoc est corpus, a bunch of hocus pocus. That's where the phrase comes from. That's your trivia for the day. I know. And you say, and why do you hold things like that in your brain, Pastor Fran? No, and nobody knows the answer to that. So, so we threw all that stuff out. But now I have come to realize we've had a long journey with some sacramental things, like we do communion in a little bit more of a sacramental liturgical way. And we do things like, if you've never been around here at Easter time, during Holy Week, you can come walk these amazing stations of the cross in this room during Holy Week. So, and you go, it's like a liturgical, sacramental kind of thing. And what I have come to realize is, and they didn't explain it well, and they don't explain it well in the older traditions of the church, in those streams of the church. What they were trying to tell us with the sacraments is that all of life is sacred, right? So when a baby is born, it's a moment of being reminded this is a sacred thing. When a couple gets married, we say this is a sacred thing, right? When last rites are given to a person who's dying, we say even this we're recognizing the sacredness of the life lived and the sacredness of the journey home, right? All of life is sacred. So my confession is this: your pastor is becoming I'm really embracing sacramental theology in my life. Now, when you hear that, you might say, does that mean like we're going to get sort of more religious-y and have 7 sacraments? No. It means that my theology has enlarged in the last couple of years to a place where I realize I'm really trying to see like everything is sacred. And then I had this epiphany one day when I was thinking about this, that we do sacraments in everyday life, we just don't call them that. I'll give you an example. We light birthday candles and we sing. Why? Because there's a grace in this, because it's special, because it matters. We throw retirement parties, right? We lay flowers on graves. We stand at the ocean and watch the sunset, and we say, there is some grace in this. And it's not just thinking about faith, it's experiencing something with your eyes, with your senses. And that's what sacramental theology is. It says you are not just a spirit or a mind, you're body, soul, and spirit. Yeah. So enter into it. I'll give you a good example of something that's not one of the 7 sacraments that we did in church. A number of years ago on Good Friday, I had everybody write down in the service the top 3 things they struggle with in terms of how they see themselves. And then we invited them to come and nail those to the cross because they're not true. And then on Holy Saturday, we burned them. And people found freedom in that. They found grace in the recognition that we tell ourselves a lot of stories about ourselves that aren't true, and that Jesus came to set us free from that. And there was something about the act of doing it. We didn't say just think about it. We said, no, write them down, nail them to the cross, and let's set those freaking things on fire, right? It was totally sacramental. So, but it isn't enough to just sort of blithely say, oh yeah, like I could say everything's sacred, and you go, oh yeah, that's cool, everything's sacred. So I want to read you a Richard Rohr quote, because Richard Rohr says, you realize things are sacred when you touch them, when you enter into them, when you stop and set your gaze, set your heart, do something with your body. So this is what he says. He says, It's not enough to say everything is sacred. You have to kiss the ground in a particular place that calls forth devotion, heart, and wonder in order to enter into the sacredness of that thing. That could be hugging a sad friend. That could be taking communion. That could be any of a million things, because God is bleeding into the world everywhere. When you go out of this church today and you see the trees in the creation, that's the grace of God coming to you. Go hug a freaking tree. You know, that's sacramental.
Our grandson does that all the
time. Yeah. That's sacramental. Anyway, so I don't know what that means. You have to figure that out. I don't know what it means for our church to be sacramental in this God is everywhere, God is coming to us sense. You'll work that out, though.
I'll work
sure.
on it.
Yeah.
As soon as I get home today.
Okay, as soon as you get home. So the last thing, we've gone a little long. The last thing we just wanted to touch on is because worship at LifeSpring has been evolving for 33 years. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it stays the same for a while, and then we kind of say, oh, it's a little, right? So we have some little shifts coming that we're going to do. Do you want to talk about that? Okay.
Yeah, so some of this, I think, has been on our minds for a while, but some of it opened our eyes more to it. A couple of weeks ago when we were with our daughter and her husband at their church, we noticed some things that were kind of different from what we do on a Sunday morning, and not that we're going to duplicate, but it just made us think about some things. Like at the beginning of their service, they, do what a lot of churches do, where they had a child or an acolyte, whatever, a person lighting a candle. And we thought, wow, that's a way to start the beginning of your service where it actually says,
we're entering into worship.
Entering into
right.
something that's
right.
other than.
Right.
And they also had some time at the beginning of service where the way they did it, they always do a confession, which, that can be heavy or it can be a good thing. We do that occasionally. But then they kind of sat. They kind of sat quietly. And the minister said, well, think about this or that. And I'm like, they're being completely quiet. That should be awkward, because coming from like our sort of evangelical, years where you have to fill the service every stinking moment,
right.
and don't let anything be awkward.
But how do you leave
don't
space
have
for
awkward
God?
Silence or weird transitions or whatever. But I think sometimes we need to just not be afraid to be quiet.
Yeah.
When we're quiet is when we hear something.
It'd be like me talking to Simi as fast as I can and saying, while I'm doing this, think about God. Reach out and connect with God.
Right,
So God, you're filling everything, man.
Shut up for a minute.
Yeah. So what we're going to do with that sounds whatever, but what we're going to do with that is we're just going to mark the beginning of our service a little bit more. Mm-hmm. We're going to pause at the beginning. And we're going to have, probably in this service, it'll be a child, because this is the 1045 service, have a child come and light the Christ candle, and there will be some words that are spoken or sung, and then the band will romp into a song, but it's going to be our way of saying to ourselves and each other, what we have come to do here, this is a thing. Like a call to worship. That's actually the historical phrase for it, is we're going to have a bit of a call to worship.
So I'm just going to cut in. Funny story. He has been wanting to do something unique like this for a long time.
Oh, Lord.
And he has said to me more than one time, how about we do a shofar?
You know what a shofar is? The ram's horn?
I'm like, we are not doing a shofar, Fran.
I said, we should blow a shofar at the beginning of our worship gathering. Yeah. And she's like, she's just basically, she's the pastor of Worship Arts. She's like, it's never going to happen.
I'm nixing that, babe.
So, just so you know.
You heard it here.
And we're also going to make a change with communion. So before the pandemic, we used to do communion here. This is the church word for it, by intinction, which meant that you took the bread and you dipped it into a cup that was being held for you. Some of us grew up with everybody drinking out of the cup kind of thing, like in the Catholic Church, and most of us felt like the little wipe didn't really help that much, right? So
you always come back around to the same side of the cup.
So the way,
turn it.
So. But we will still have individual cups for people, but it's really not a germy thing because you're just dipping and then eating. But we did that for years and years and years, and we're going to go back to it, and the reason is because I have a theological hang-up about communion, which is that one of the many beautiful meanings of communion in the New Testament, there's a place where Paul says, are we not all partakers of one loaf, which is Christ? Are we not all sharers in one cup, which is Christ. So when someone holds out a tray with 40 little cups on it to you, that's 40 of us. When someone holds out a cup, it's saying, we all drink from the same place. Our bond is in this love of Christ that we have been given. So we're going to go back to doing that. Again, there will be little cups available if somebody's more comfortable with that. And then the last one, and I know we've gone a little too long, and I apologize for that, but I tried to tighten it up this service. How come it didn't work?
You expounded too many times.
So, but the one other thing we're going to do, and we're going to give you a sample of it here in just a second, is through our experiences at the group we're a part of, the PEC, the Post Evangelical Collective, we've gone to the conferences the last couple of years. And one of the things we've experienced at those conferences is, because they worship at the conferences, there are times of worship, and we've experienced some worship music that I would just call a little more soul-oriented. Songs and a feel to the music that says, you can come no matter where you are, and you can bring your heart.
Yeah.
And you might feel joyful,
Yeah.
you might feel sad, you might feel confused today, but God is here. And He's here for you to reach, it's what we were talking about earlier, to reach into that space and find that connection. And we found ourselves with a particular kinds of songs they were doing, saying like, wow, we need to do this at LifeSpring. You want to?
It kind of gives you a chance to breathe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, hey, so here's the deal. My wife loves to sing up there. This is not in her comfort zone. She's a total introvert, so would you put your hands together for her doing this?